Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping into a totally fascinating explainer based on Tommaso Maria Ricci's research. We're going to unpack a real-world case study about change management and AI implementation that is just, well, it's wild. We're looking at a massive financial services company. We're talking 2,800 employees that tried to roll out a brand new AI tool, and they just hit a massive brick wall. But here's the kicker. This isn't another story about buggy code or, broken technology. No, this is a story about humans. It's about how organizations actually operate on a day-to-day basis, how employee resistance and skills gaps really manifest, and how this company managed to pull off an absolute miracle save at the last minute. We're going to break down exactly why this project almost collapsed and, more importantly, how they turned the whole ship around.
Okay, so let's set the stage with the initial promise. This firm decided to deploy AI assistants for their client-facing advisors. And honestly, the business logic was absolutely rock solid. I mean, the system promised to save something like 60 to 70% of the time spent on reviewing investment portfolios and drafting client communications. Just think about that for a second. What company wouldn't jump at the chance to cut more than half the administrative workload of their most expensive employees, right? And the tech itself was excellent. It was a top-tier enterprise platform seamlessly integrated with their CRM. Basically, everything was perfectly set up for a massive win.
But, this is exactly where we collide with organizational reality. According to the source data, 70% of digital transformation initiatives just completely fail to hit their goals. And for AI specifically, the picture is even bleaker. Almost 80% of enterprise AI initiatives never even reach production scale. But here's what's really interesting about that 70% figure. The technology itself is almost never the culprit. The language models are usually reliable and lightning fast. So what actually fails? Well, it's the people, the processes, and the incentives. AI implementation failure is almost always a human failure. And that is exactly what happened here.
The gap between the promise and the reality was honestly staggering. They started out smart with a highly controlled pilot of 25 advisors. The results? Fantastic. We're talking a 40% surge in productivity. Everyone's high-fiving, leadership hits the green light, and they roll it out to all 600 advisors across the company. But the reality of that wider rollout? An absolute disaster. Fast forward 12 months, and the average advisor was using the AI tool for less than 20% of the tasks it was designed for. And that productivity gain? It plummeted to a miserable 8%, completely missing the 30 to 40% they promised in the business model. The CEO was literally ready to pull the plug on the whole thing.
So the big question we have to ask ourselves is, why? Why did a tool that worked so beautifully and saved so much time in the pilot fail so spectacularly in the wider workforce? I mean, it was the exact same technology, the same system, the same interfaces. The answer, it turns out, wasn't hiding in the code. It was hiding in the way the organization was actually programmed to work. The diagnostic team went in to study the human geography of the firm, and what they found was eye-opening. What they uncovered were 3 deep, structural failures. These weren't invisible forces just suffocating the project. First up, outdated compliance models. Second, a complete misalignment in sales incentives. And third, and arguably the most fascinating, a deep psychological threat to the professional identity of the firm's most senior advisors. Let's break these down to see exactly how employee resistance and skills gaps fueled this fire.
Let's start by looking at those first 2 massive operational roadblocks, the operating model and the incentive system. We often think that all it takes is handing employees a shiny new tool and running a quick training session. But if their actual work environment punishes them for using it, no amount of training will save you. In the old model, the compliance team literally required a manual review of every single piece of client communication. And guess what? When AI was introduced, those rules didn't change. So sure, the AI drafts a letter in 2 seconds, but then it sits in a queue for days waiting for a strict manual review. All that time saved? Completely erased. Plus, how are these advisors evaluated? By revenue per client and call volume. The AI made their interactions way faster and higher quality, but the system didn't reward them for that efficiency. So, these advisors had absolutely zero personal incentive to learn a new tool. This wasn't them being stubborn about technology, it was a completely rational resistance to a broken system. But the real crisis, the one that nearly buried this project for good, had nothing to do with compliance rules or bonus checks. It was about the people themselves. Let's talk about the identity crisis. The firm's most senior advisors, the ones managing the biggest clients, were fiercely resisting the tool. To understand why, we need to talk about identity capital. Imagine a senior financial advisor. They've spent 20 years building their expertise, honing their intuition, and mastering the craft of complex client communication.
Then, out of nowhere, management brings in a piece of software that can do massive chunks of their job at the push of a button. And to make matters worse, 24-year-old junior advisors are picking up the software way faster. For the veterans, this is an existential threat. They felt like the organization was basically saying their 2 decades of experience were suddenly worthless. This skills gap between the younger and older staff just amplified that feeling of irrelevance, which triggered active, hardline resistance.
Now, what is truly amazing about this case study is how the company climbed out of this hole. They were staring down a total collapse, but they managed a spectacular turnaround. And the best part? They didn't rewrite a single line of code. They didn't buy new software. They just started managing the human side of the change.
They rolled out 3 really specific interventions. Step 1. They spent 4 months negotiating with the compliance department to create brand new protocols that actually distinguish between AI drafts, AI edits, and human content. Boom, bottleneck unblocked. Step 2. They fixed the incentives. They introduced an AI-driven quality scorecard into the evaluation metrics, directly linking tool adoption to performance reviews. And step 3, the absolute game changer that solved the resistance, they launched a senior mentorship program to bridge the skills gap and tackle that identity crisis head-on.
This mentorship program was a total paradigm shift. They didn't tell these senior advisors to go sit in a room and learn how to click the buttons. Instead, leadership went to them and asked them to use their vast expertise to give feedback to the AI system, to literally train it using their best work. They reframed their roles from passive users to the trainers of the firm's AI. And wow, did it work. It instantly restored their identity capital. Suddenly, their 20 years of experience was once again the most valuable asset in the room. The resistance just evaporated, and these senior advisors became the AI's biggest advocates.
The results of these human-centered tweaks were just phenomenal. Look at these numbers after 18 months. The adoption rate across the advisors skyrocketed from barely 20% all the way to 78%. And that productivity metric, it jumped from a disappointing 8% to a massive 32% across the board. By finally resolving the human and structural friction, they unlocked the true potential of the technology that had been sitting there the whole time.
And as an amazing bonus, this didn't just fix things internally. It radiated out to the clients. Client satisfaction surged by a full 14 points. Why? Because the system was finally working in harmony with the staff. The advisors were faster, more available, and instead of feeling threatened by the AI, they were empowered by it. And the clients? They felt that service upgrade immediately.
So what's the big takeaway for leaders here? I want to leave you with a provocative question. When you're looking at your own AI strategy, are you only investing in the technology, or are you investing in the way your people actually work? Because as we've seen, if you ignore the human side, the natural resistance, the skills gaps, the professional identity of your team, you are literally building a castle on sand. The companies that are thriving right now don't necessarily have better algorithms. They just have a much better grasp on integrating that tech into the human nature of their organizations. Something to definitely keep in mind for your next big rollout. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.